Thank you.
Just to add to that, the CABs, it's problematic because you then have to train the volunteers, and the issues of cultural competency aren't actually quite high. The irony is for MB, the positions they're calling, I think, are immigration retention advisors, to do some of the work that they've taken away from ARMS, who have to then go to all the meetings that Mary organises so they can actually learn how to do it. I can say that, Mary can't.
Councillor Fletcher, do you have something?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the time I had my question, we didn't have the recommendations that Mr. Kimpton has been crafting. I guess for me, C is insufficient. We've heard the gap that is going to be there, the vacuum, to quote Mary, in terms of the delivery of those social services. It is beholden on all of us to ensure the successful integration of our New Zealand family. And I think that particularly for the refugee community, this social gap is not well understood. I believe that going beyond MB to the ministers responsible is really an action that should be undertaken, and perhaps with the support of Dame Susan Devoy. And I would be encouraging of a D, at the highest level of the Auckland Council, the advocacy be taken to the ministers responsible. You know, we've got the Prime Minister in Iraq right now. He is understanding of the plight of those citizens. When they come to, I've watched this over 25 years now, that the integration takes a very long time for those refugees, and I think that that needs to be carefully articulated. And lastly, this is a council that has agreed that we just are really struggling with picking up the costs, the social costs that the government is imposing on us. I think it is actually time to go back and actually restate the importance of the delivery of social services by central government, and not keep putting them and the obligations on to local government. So I would very much welcome Mr. Kimpton if you could allow us to bring strong advocacy. And I'm not talking about the chair of the committee writing to the minister. I'm talking about the highest level of the Auckland Council actually going and speaking with the Minister of Immigration, and hopefully with Dame Susan Devoy able to provide that information as the representative for the Parliament of New Zealand.
Well, I mean, okay, so you're saying the Mayor, but we've heard the debate here this morning. I think
well, if
that would be appropriate for the chair of the committee to make that overture to the Minister.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's just been pointed out by my colleague here, it would be inappropriate for the Mayor because he is the co-patron. I'm very happy for you to represent us, Mr. Chairman, but I think it's got to be in person and formalised.
Okay, so we'll change that. Councillor Casey, will you
all cool.
and put yours into as D?
Thank you. Yep.
Okay. So there's no other questions? Sorry, Councillor.
I don't have a question. I'd just like to speak to it when
okay, well, I'm going to move it. I move the recommendation.
And also moving D as well. Can we discuss
Sorry?
this?
He's included. Well, thank you.
He has included it. He just said.
So we, excuse me, Chair. So we have first recommendation A. You've got B and C. B looking at budget, C looking at direct engagement with MB and ARMS. D is moved by way of addition by Councillor Casey. That seeks to do two things. One, to write to the Minister of Immigration, the other one seeking a continuation of that support. You may wish, depending on what you want to do with that, you may want to modify that to meet with the Minister of Immigration, or you could have a separate resolution again, but that's something for you to discuss.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I wonder whether Councillor Casey would indulge in her amendment, which I'm happy to support, the sentiment that I've expressed in terms of the meeting and also the inclusion of Dame Susan Devoy.
Good.
Okay, that'd be fine. So what we'll do, firstly go back to A to start with, and I will move that we thank Mary Dawson and Dame Susan Devoy for their attendance today, answering the questions. Was there a seconder for that?
Yep.
So seconded by Councillor Casey. I'll put that motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declare that carried. So I thank you for attending. I just ask you now to return to the
Sorry, Councillor Woods, I've just had a word with James from the Mayor's office. We met with the Mayor earlier this week, and James has just informed me that the Mayor has undertaken to meet with the Minister. So I'm sorry just to come in with that late.
Well, you should meet too.
Well, we'll coordinate that between the two organisations, between the two arms of council. So we thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Against, declare it carried. Thank you. Thank you.
Just some clarification around that.
Yeah.
Is the Mayor then representing the council at this meeting, or is he representing arms? And I think that's an important distinction that we need to know, because it would appear to me that the Mayor has gone off and made some kind of unilateral decision to go and meet with the Minister of Immigration, and I'd like to know on what basis, whether it's a personal meeting that he's going to have, or is he actually representing the council?
Well, James can answer that. Mr. Liddell, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The Mayor met with Mary and Bruce on Monday, I believe, and undertook to have a conversation with Lewis Holden, Deputy SSC in Auckland, which he did yesterday afternoon, and also to meet with the Minister of Immigration to talk about sustainable funding for Auckland migrant services on behalf of Auckland as a whole.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you for that, and thank you for the presentation this morning. Councillor Darby, would you want to move the recommendation?
Well, I didn't draft them, and I think it should be
Okay,
with
well,
the Chair.
I'll move it.
Mr. Chairman, can we talk about D? Are we including that in? I mean, I think that I want to hear from MB as well. I mean, we're saying there we're supporting arms and seeking a continuation of government funding. I mean, I hear what's being said, and I understand it, but I want to know what MB's... I mean, that's why I'm supporting C. I want to hear from MB what their problems are and issues are, and understand from there how we move forward. I mean, I've no problem with you meeting with the Minister.
Well, there are probably,
that's not what
there's
it
probably
says.
more than one minister. I don't know how many
Well, it
ministers.
is, because we need
Yeah.
to meet with whoever's involved. I mean,
Yeah, so
Anne Tolley as well.
there are different ministers. So I think we'd have to nail that. It'll take some work by our officers, the Mayor's office, to find out exactly who the people are, but it does give the authority for that to happen. So that's why I think D would be helpful. So I'm going to move it. Councillor Darby, you'll second it?
Well, I will. I think Councillor Casey.
Okay,
Casey's good. I just wanted to speak to it.
Okay, you can speak.
Sometimes this chamber is somewhat stranger than fiction, and
Absolutely, we make things...
and I thank Ms Dawson and Dame Susan for coming today, and the memos that we received, I think it was last week on this, just to alert us to this. And then I think that was a week after the diaspora hit Europe, and it continues to hit Europe out of war-torn Middle East, particularly Syria. And there lies the fiction, or the strangeness of the fiction, because we sit down here and somewhat remote, we think, at the bottom of the world, and somewhat ignorant of what's happening in Europe. But it's not just Europe. These migrations have been happening for some time now. They're spiked, and our antenna is up, and we're attentive to the migrations that are refugee migrations that are hitting Europe, because there's plenty of TV networks that are in Europe that are recording those migrations and sending them back. They've been happening around the Middle East for a very long time. They've been happening in Africa. They're going to happen more in Asia, and it won't just be through war-torn displacement. Climate migration is just around the corner, and that's the one that we need to have our antennas up big time on, because that will be coming our way. And I guess I'm mentioning this, Mr. Chair, because we're talking about an entity which I understand is meeting all its performance targets and is having its budget cut by government. Now, I want to know why, when you perform well, you do well in your sector, and you get slashed. And while that's happening, the risk of the need for those services, the greater need for those services triggered by international events is pretty damned obvious. So I think we need to marry this up and get the bigger picture and get an understanding at this council, because this city is going to be the place of those migrants and refugees who find their way to this part of the world. They are wanting to be in cities. They don't want to be in small towns. They are primarily coming from cities. That's the truth of it. So the migrations that are happening in Europe should be really taking our interest right now. 800,000 into Germany alone, 75,000 into the US, and we're taking a couple of plane loads. The international pressure is going to come on New Zealand a lot more than it is now, and we will be obliged to take more refugees in particular and displaced migrants. So let's take a bigger picture interest in this, and I hope the C and the D unravel that and get our thinking around the importance of ARMS and other agencies that are going to be doing that work for us. Because if we don't have that understanding, we are going to have the big problems that Europe is experiencing right now.
Thank you.
Well said,
Councillor Cashmore, did you have something?
Yes, thanks. I agree with what Councillor Darby is saying. My only issue is that this is a changing feast, and ARMS has been around, as Councillor Fletcher says, for a long time. So we need to be a bit more flexible, and D, to me, removes any degree of flexibility we have or potentially limits it. So certainly support B and C, and the ongoing discussions with the MB and the government about where we're going to go for the future, and a joined up, coordinated and deliverable approach is important. And D, to me, is superfluous for what that's trying to achieve.
So I just want to speak to this and say that, you know, this Auckland Regional Migration or Migrant Services has been an organisation that has been around for, well, a long time, but as it was stated earlier, all the previous legacy councils, or many of them, had their own policies or programs in relation to migrants, and they actually had offices within their council areas. And since the merger into the new council, things have changed. I think you know, it has been brought together under one umbrella, but now to hear that there's no kind of place in South Auckland where these services are being provided from is of concern. So I think, you know, that we're talking about a wide range of issues concerning the services that are provided. So I don't think, I think that the work work's being done by the Mayor's Office of James Liddell's confirmed that they're doing work there. Mr. Bodman and his team are doing work. So I think it's got to be coordinated under officers, and we've got to have a unified approach to this as a council as well. Because it's no use us, this committee, which is a committee of the whole of council, talking about this issue today and not tying up with the work that the mayor's doing as well on this issue, because it really needs the business case or the work that's put together by the officers to be the cornerstone and the starting point from the work that we do, for the work that we do. So I think that if I'd ask councillors to support this, I appreciate what Councillor Darby says, that the world is in a huge amount of turmoil in relation to refugees and the crisis that are being experienced in other parts of the world. We've indicated that we will do our best, but it's very much smaller than probably what other people in other parts of the world are doing at the present time. But, you know, this whole issue could, you know, rear its head, and it's a difficult situation in other parts of the world as well. So I think this would be a good starting point. It'll come back to it's going to go to the Finance and Performance Committee just in relation to the funding, but it'll come back to this committee in the near future in relation to a way forward. That's how it is. So unless there's any speakers, I'm going to put the motion.
Can we put them separately, D separately?
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
D.
So I'm
Together.
going to put B and...
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
point of order. I note that there's no second.
I know, I second it.
Councillor Casey's amendment.
that no earlier, I seconded it.
Seconded councillor Casey's motion. Okay, so we'll do B and C. I'll put those parts. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declare that carried. We now go to D, moved by councillor Casey, seconded by councillor Fletcher. I'll put that. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against?
No.
I think on the voices that is carried. Thank you.
It should
Thank
be
you.
councillor Casey, not councillor Cathy.
Oh, councillor, oh yeah, well, it's, we're very